Wes G. Roberts, welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. Well, an alien experiencer is always someone who's worthy of coming on my show with all the interesting stuff and far out stuff that I talk about. Um, did I see you at a conference? I don't know, but I wouldn't have contacted you unless I felt your experiences were worthy enough of being on my show, and I certainly, most definitely do. And you seem to have a very interesting life story to tell. So why don't you get into that? I will put myself on mute while you tell your life story, and I don't have Alex Jonesitis, as I always tell my guests. I don't interrupt my guests, so I will give you the opportunity to say all you want now, and you got the floor, and then I'll get into some nitty gritty, serious questions after that. Knock yourself out.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, and hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here, absolutely. Andrew contacted me through Facebook, an account I don't use as often as I should, so I kept him waiting, so I apologize for that. And probably, I'm just going to say, Andrew, if you didn't see me at an expo, you might have caught one of the shows I've done. I've been happily interviewing a couple of three times a month, actually, for several months. So I feel very fortunate in that. So what I'd like to do is just, I guess, share some key things about myself, and maybe those will be good talking points a little bit later. When I was a teenager, mid-teens, I started to realize, pardon me, that there was more to life than what we could see, or further, what we could perceive. And so I really didn't understand perceive back then, but in retrospect, I get it. So I began to investigate things that interested me, things like the paranormal, things like mediumship, things like spirituality. Years later, it was things like UFOs and extraterrestrials. So I began my journey really, I guess, in my mid-teens, trying to sort out what I was destined to do with any of this. You know, it's perhaps not the norm, although it's certainly more popular in North America and worldwide than it used to be. So I sort of went through life thinking, well, this is interesting. I have a growing interest in ufology. I have a growing interest in alien crafts. This is me in my 20s, maybe 30s. I decided eventually to hook up with MUFON. And when I hooked up with MUFON, I originally thought I wanted to become a field investigator. So I started that, but that wasn't really my interest. So I began to attend small meetings and eventually met some people who claimed to be alien abductees. That was really my first brush with that. And I thought that was peculiar. You know, this was not happening in my life that I was aware of at that point. So I thought that was really peculiar. So I began to meet some alien abductees, and a couple of them, in my opinion, had really what I would have called then strange energy coming from them. I really could not put my finger on it. So I sort of went through my 30s and so forth and thought, I'm more interested in this than I thought. Picked up some books like Bud Hopkins books, John Mack books, and began to be fascinated by all this. But still, there was nothing I could point to in my life that would say, hey, maybe you've been through something like this too. Then in the 1980s, and I know I'm jumping a number of years, but this is kind of to the point. In the 1980s, I had a peculiar, lengthy experience one night after going to sleep. And it was peculiar enough that when I woke up in the morning, 5:30, 6, whatever it was, my partner was asleep beside me. I was staring at the digital clock, and the minutes were ticking by as if they were seconds. So like 5 minutes seemed to go by in 5 seconds. And I thought, I'm really not in a in a normal state of mind, I just had an odd experience and this clock's really acting pretty funny. So I snuck out into the other bedroom, just grabbed some scrap paper and wrote down what I could remember of the experience. And then that really started to dog me from that point in the mid 1980s until sometime in the 2000s. I'm going to have to say 20 years later, approximately, when I thought, you know what? This experience has never left my mind. It's always mystified me. It doesn't have, as far as I can tell, any of the trademarks of a dream, an out-of-the-body experience, an illusion, a hallucination. It certainly wasn't drug or alcohol induced. So I was able to eventually write off all the kinds of things it was not, only to be left with one thing in a very Sherlock Holmes sense here. The one thing was that if it's not any of those other things, it might be an alien abduction. It was the only one left. So I wrestled with that then, even after 18, 19 years, for another couple of years. I had to, let's say, perform career-wise because I'm a contract college professor, and I was at that point. So I had to keep a very logical, pardon me, stable mind. I'm sorry about that dry throat for a sec, apologize. So I had to perform every week. I had to be very, very organized, very, very logical because I teach computer applications. And I thought I've got to consider getting this looked into. So I had a great trip abroad. I went to Portugal for the first time. This was in the 2000s. I met up with a friend who I'd met online, and we had an all-day conversation. And part of that conversation had to do with this, what I'd gone through, what I thought was going on in my life. And she left me with a thought before I came home, before I came back to Toronto. If it were her, she said she'd want to investigate this further. In other words, perhaps look at hypnosis. And I think it's important to point out at this early stage in our conversation that this is a consciously recalled experience, one of many. In fact, I'm going to say 25 to 45% or so of my experiences have been consciously recalled. I'll remember them. The others have been uncovered or recovered through hypnosis. So getting close to cutting to the chase here, about a year after my Portugal trip, I hooked up with a reputable hypnotherapist who was just starting up her practice, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke. She is also in Toronto, and she did an assessment of me, as a hypnotherapist is required to do. She wanted to make sure I wasn't exhibiting any signs or problems that were better handled by a professional, say a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So I didn't fall into that category as far as she was concerned. We began my hypnosis journey around 2010 or so, and I did 5 years of hypnosis with her, approximately 35 sessions in total, and uncovered and got closer to the truth of who and what I was through those 35 sessions. Somewhere in the beginning stage of my hypnosis sessions, I came to terms with this, came to terms with how I felt about it, came to terms with integrating it into my life. And these days, if I'm to look at the present, I'm a pretty stable character, still a college prof, still a busy person, still capable of switching left brain to right brain, fairly balanced. And I've integrated most of the experiences. And for several years, I've been sharing them. I've been sharing them at conferences. And in addition, over the last 3.5 years, I've written a couple of books about my experiences. In the first one, my hypnotherapist comments on what I'm saying. And this is stuff taken from transcripts. And in the second, I'm just trying to come to terms with the different kinds of experiences I've had and trying to explain why me. So Andrew and folks, I hope that's a good setup or startup for further questions.
Yes, thank you very much. So when it comes to alien abductions, I think first question is what species of ET seems to be most common? Maybe you can give a percentage on which kinds of species are the ones that abduct the most and the least most in your experience of what you've seen people have to go through, and the purpose of the abductions. Is there something sinister to it, or is it just like let's just do a little experimental research and keep it harmless on the human kind of thing?
Oh,
So,
good start with questions.
yes.
Thank you.
So,
Part of it will be speculation. For me, personally, I've been involved mostly with what people will call Nordics or tall whites. Um, these are generally nice, quote unquote, beings who are interested in furthering our evolution, in my opinion, expanding our consciousness and so forth. I've had experience with a couple of other species. One I can't identify because I don't know what they are, and I've never seen them. And the other is just a group of brown-skinned alien beings who generally I have heard are referred to as helpers. That is all, just helpers. They help facilitate things. But in terms of percentages and things like that, Andrew, I think a lot of people, at least used to be, abducted mostly by grays, either small grays or tall grays, or both. Small grays are often not thought of as living organisms as we know them, being somewhat mechanical or somewhat like cyborgs, actually. And the tall grays are sheer alien, as far as I know. I think that'd be the most common type in people's lives, not in my life. As to what they want, Lesley, my friend, and I have had many conversations about this, and we feel, and there's no, I don't have evidence to support this, we feel that the days of alien abduction for human experimentation, medical procedures, and so forth are numbered, are on their way out. And the reason we feel that is like, how many times do you need to abduct a human and do a medical experiment on them to find out what makes us tick? You know, if these are super smart or super different species, do they really need to keep doing that? So as far as the physical abductions that still take place, there are probably a few in that category, which is sinister, in my opinion. There are a few that are equally sinister that have to do with, let's say, with population, with extracting biological material, to be polite, from males and females for some kind of hybrid program. And then there's a whole host of other experiences, and I think these are in the majority, I hope they are, that are more positive, consciousness expanding. A lot of abductees will say that they've been told to protect and work towards the protection of Mother Earth, of the Earth, the environment, the resources we have. This is not something I've largely experienced. For me, I've experienced a lot of consciousness altering information, you know, next steps in mental evolution, so to speak. I'm not saying I'm a super person or anything close to it, but certainly any psychic abilities I had when I was younger have been enhanced. I've learned a lot more about energy and the exchange of energy and the transformation of energy. And I've learned something about healing, and not claiming to be a healer, just saying I've learned more about healing in the sense that I've tried a few little experiments on myself. I've exchanged healing energies with other people. It seems to work every time. So I hope that's an answer for you.
thank you. You've said you've learned about energy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is something that's very pertinent, I think. It should be pertinent and key in the world today, especially since the energy we are using should be obsolete. and we could be using energy that doesn't have to make us have to work to make a living. It could be free for everybody if there wasn't some system of domination and control that still had a little bit of power left over on this planet that seems to be lingering. But if we could get rid of oil and fossil fuels and coal and that kind of energy, what kind of energy are we talking about that you know about that could be replaced on this earth and to provide for everybody? And do you perhaps have any ideas as to how that can go out there, can be put out in this world? I mean, David Wilcock said that it's not uncommon for someone who creates some sort of free energy system to get told by the system of domination and control, get bribed, telling them, we'll give you a ton of money and a free lifetime trip to Aruba or some island paradise if you agree not to give this technology to the whole world. And if the person refuses the bribe, then they'll tell them, well, we're going to murder you and your wife and kids if you get this stuff out there. Is that understood? So you better not get this stuff out there. So well, hopefully the people that would murder at the drop of a hat to keep this stuff from getting out to the world are being removed from power. So hopefully we'll see this stuff soon. But what kind of technologies are we talking about, energy technologies that you have learned about? And do you have any ideas and suggestions as to how it can be put out into this world?
So certainly, Andrew, and just to clarify, I would say that there are two kinds of energy I was talking about, but obviously not clearly. One is the energy you're talking about right now, and I can speak to that in a small way. And the other is personal energy, spiritual energy. And I'm not talking about necessarily one deity. I'm talking about the energy we exchange as people. The energy that's in our words, the energy that is in our voices, the energy that's in our touch, even psychic energy, the energy we use to perceive. But to your first point, I know here in Canada, we're moving further and further forward in terms of simple things like electric vehicles, electric motorcycles, electric everything is getting more popular here. I'm seeing more and more wind farms here, although kind of speaking to what I've heard to be the downside, and I don't know if this is true. Some people are against wind farms because apparently they can cause nausea or can cause farm animals to act up. I don't know how much of that is so, but I see resistance to some of the more free energy forms. There's also a company, and I just read about this 3 weeks ago, and I wish I could give you a better reference today, that's going to harness the energy of waves underneath the ocean. The problem with that apparently has always been to design something sturdy enough that can deal with the ebb and flow of water at depth and not get broken in the process. But there are huge initiatives underway for harnessing the power of water, which in theory wouldn't hurt us or hurt the biological system or the ecosystem down there. Wind and certainly solar, I'm seeing more and more of that, and electric. So I'd love to see us weaned off of fossil fuel. But what I am seeing, which is interesting, and I'm sure you could comment on this too, Andrew, is that now all the large oil companies, including up here, are gearing themselves to somehow service hybrid or electric cars. So they're not going out of business necessarily. They're altering their business model. So I'm crossing my fingers that will not have a negative impact in terms of how much this is going to cost us down the road for a pure electric vehicle to recharge or things like that. So I don't know a lot about energy, I don't think, but those are some of the ideas I've run into and I've heard and I have felt. And the other category, again, Andrew, is personal energy, and that's been expanded in me a lot.
Well, personal energy. Well, you call it personal energy, but maybe that's a misnomer because well, where we shouldn't think of ourselves as people, we should think of ourselves as consciousness,
Sure.
having an experience. Yes.
Yep.
So when I mean, it's not like we can all become Jedi masters overnight
No.
and do the things that that Yoda taught Luke Skywalker how to do. Um, so, but it is possible to, well, harness the force that exists in reality. That's that the Star Wars Force is an analogy to. And what kind of spiritual powers, I guess,
Hmm.
is do you think humanity has a chance of attaining sooner rather than later, and which spiritual powers and abilities do we have that you think are not going to be so easy to attain and maybe a little further down the line before we attain them? You can take as long as you need to explain all the powers you know that we have and how long it may take for us to attain all of them, given the state of consciousness and the rate it's expanding in the world today, based on what you've seen.
I appreciate your clarity, and I will try to do the same thing to further this discussion. I'm not necessarily talking about Star Wars and harnessing the Force. I think it's possible in small degrees, but I'm talking about the exchange of energy. What we exchange that's not normally perceived or evident. So consciousness filtering itself through our bodies is not your exact words, but that I also feel that's what we are. We're spirit. We're spirit. We're consciousness being filtered through dense physical matter, sometimes denser than others. And because of that, just to talk about spiritual energy being exchanged, we're sometimes, some of us, not aware that something is being exchanged, not aware that somebody has a whole world behind their words, not aware what happened to them in the last few hours, not aware what they brought to a conversation. And I look at these things and I think, well, what falls under this general umbrella of being aware and of having communication? And it's like just about everything I can think of, whether it's the trees out the front here speaking to one another, not in a language necessarily, although there have been some speech patterns identified in trees and plants, but whether it's them or whether it's you and I, or whether it's me potentially reaching your listeners on a different level, it's first an awareness piece. And I think that's the biggest thing that's happened to me. I've been able to intensify or deepen my awareness of messages. And the whole healing thing that I talked about earlier, again, this is not my forte. I'm no expert. But the whole healing thing to me is also a piece of communication, a piece of exchange. Someone is filtering or channeling or helping another person, their body, their system become aware of healing, and then their body, their system takes care of the rest. But we get a chance to be in the middle of all that, the more aware we are. So the energies I'm talking about are being really just more aware of the all levels or as many levels as possible of communication that are going on. And also energy or communication reaching us from other beings. So in my personal case, Andrew, the other beings have included alien beings, but not only. You'll hear people talk about their guides. You'll hear people talk about their spirit guides. You'll hear some people, magicians, talk about maybe a holy guardian angel or just the word guide, uppercase G. And you'll hear people talking about, well, my grandmother passed a few years ago and I can feel her helping guide me through life. That's energy. That's communication. So it's energy being transformed into communication, into thoughts. And so the kind of energy I'm talking about is exactly along these lines. communicating, or at least being aware that you're communicating more closely with others, with other people, with animals, if you will, with other spirits, and opening yourself to that communication. And all this, in my opinion, I equate with energy. So to me, energy and communication are almost the same thing. I hope that helps clarify my remarks.
Okay, so it's all in the communication. That's a nice way of putting it. Now, the term abduction,
Mm-hmm.
some say that's kind of not the proper term to use, in the sense that everybody agrees to a soul contract before they incarnate in this reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that the abduction you experience is something that you've already contracted to. So you're not actually getting abducted against your will.
Mm-hmm.
Others say that's kind of not a right way to look at it. It should be thought of as an abduction because, well, even though you made a soul contract, you're kind of got amnesia regarding that soul contract. So you feel that you're being taken, abducted at the time. So there's nothing wrong with calling it an abduction. But how do you look at it, and do you also see it as free will interference or not free will interference, in the sense that you made the soul contract to do it, but then again, some say it is free will interference because you got amnesia when you incarnate in this world, and for them to take you like that is kind of against your will. So we can agree to disagree on this. People can, but what's your take on it?
I'm going to agree. I do believe we made a soul contract, and I do believe it can include this clause or this part of it, that at some point this is going to happen to you. The against the free will part, to support that argument, I would say that the timing and the nature of the experiences that we're sometimes put through are not, we would never agree to those. Soul contract or not, we would never agree to the conditions, to the timing, to the parameters, for instance. So, my own case, yes, I discovered I made a contract, and this was after years of hypnosis. I thought it'd be nice to know how much free will or how much of this I agreed to or may have agreed to. And so my interpretation of understanding my messages were that we agreed, other races and myself, that at some point, if possible, and this was on me, Andrew, I would awaken. I would become aware. I would wake up to the fact that this actually happened. And it would bring me some peace of mind and some acceptance. Where I don't have peace of mind and acceptance is, as I just said, sometimes the timing is just not right for you, and I have not had control over the timing almost ever. Sometimes the circumstances are strenuous or stressful or traumatic, and it's like, did I read the small print in my soul contract? Evidently, I did not. And sometimes it's just downright disturbing, and it's like, I don't believe I signed on for that. And so that was the thing that really bugged me after I came to terms with the fact that, yeah, at some point I'm supposed to be aware of all this. I still maintain, and I've said this to other interviewers as well, that often they being alien life forms, will pick the timing, pick or create the place. It could be a fake place. Pick or create the other players, humans or not, and they may be alive or not, and then observe. And that speaks to something you said earlier. I think they do a lot of observing. They're, in my opinion, in my experience, fascinated by emotion, fascinated by trauma, fascinated by our decision-making process when we're thrust into a situation. Oh, what's this guy Wes going to do here? How's he going to respond to the stimulus? How will he respond to the environment? Pardon me. How will he respond to these other players, whether they're just props or they're real? And they let it unfold. And they let it unfold up until the point when sometimes I become aware, and I thought something isn't right. And I've said that, somebody's yanking my chain here. And that's when those experiences for me are often terminated. And there's been at least a half a dozen of them that have been terminated at that point when I said, something's odd about this whole thing. So hopefully that will lead to further discussion, what I just said.
Thank you. All right, 35 minutes into this interview, I think now is probably a good time for me to make the rest of this interview pay-per-view. Folks, thank you for being with me this long in this interview, but for the rest of this interview, please do consider subscribing on Patreon so you can listen to the rest of this interview and whatever important key questions I will be asking. In this interview, I decided to make it audio only since I got someone walking around my house at the moment. So, anybody's wondering why that's the case, even though I've been trying to do some video interviews in the present day. Today was not really a good day to do that. So, now that I've gotten that out of the way,